David Hartwell III slammed his platinum pen onto the mahogany conference table, with enough force to make the crystal water glasses tremble. As CEO of Hartwell Global Dynamics, a multinational consulting firm worth $1.8 billion, he was accustomed to having his demands met instantly and without question. Today's emergency board meeting had been called to address a crisis that threatened to destroy a crucial merger with a consortium of international companies, and his patience had already worn dangerously thin. "This is completely unacceptable," he snarled at Catherine Mills, the professional translator who had been working for his company for 6 months. "I specifically told you that the Japanese delegation needed to hear confidence and strengthen our proposal, not this wishy-washy diplomatic nonsense you've been feeding them." Catherine, a competent linguist in her 30s who spoke fluent Japanese, Korean, and Mandarin, maintained her professional composure despite David's escalating hostility. "Mr. Hartwell, I translated your words exactly as you spoke them. The cultural context requires a certain level of respectful formality when addressing business partners from—" "Cultural context?" David interrupted with a harsh laugh. "I don't pay you $60,000 a year to give me anthropology lectures. I pay you to make these people understand that Hartwell Global Dynamics is the dominant partner in this merger, not some equal participant in their tea ceremony diplomatic games." The morning had started badly when the initial video conference with representatives from Japan, South Korea, Germany, and Brazil had ended abruptly after what appeared to be a series of translation miscommunications. David had spent the past hour ranting about lost opportunities and incompetent staff, while his board of directors watched nervously from around the polished table. "Sir," Catherine tried again, "the issue may be that your proposed contract terms are being perceived as unnecessarily aggressive. In Japanese business culture, the language I used was actually quite direct by their standards. Perhaps if we could adjust the tone of the proposals themselves." "The tone?" David's voice rose to a near shout. "The tone is exactly what it should be. The tone of a company that has the leverage to dictate terms because we're bringing $800 million to this partnership. These people should be grateful for the opportunity to work with an American firm of our caliber." Dr. Elizabeth Warner, the company's head of international relations and one of the few board members brave enough to challenge David directly, cleared her throat diplomatically. "David, perhaps Catherine has a point about cultural sensitivity. These partnerships require—" "Elizabeth, with all due respect, you're not the one who built this company from a small regional consultancy into a global powerhouse," David cut her off. "I didn't get where I am by worrying about hurt feelings and cultural sensitivities. I got here by making it clear that Hartwell Global Dynamics operates on American business principles: efficiency, directness, and results." Catherine glanced around the room at the uncomfortable faces of the other executives, all of whom seemed to recognize that David's approach was sabotaging the very deals he was trying to close, but none willing to risk his wrath by speaking up. "Mr. Hartwell," she said carefully, "I understand your frustration, but effective translation requires more than just converting words from one language to another. It requires understanding the cultural and business context that make communication successful. When I translate your statements into Japanese, I have to consider not just what you're saying, but how it will be received by people who—" "Stop," David commanded, holding up his hand. "Just stop with the excuses and the academic theories. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to reconvene that conference call in 30 minutes, and you're going to translate my words exactly as I say them, without any of your cultural filtering or diplomatic editing. These foreign companies need to understand that we're not asking for their partnership. We're offering it, and they can take it or leave it." Catherine's professional facade finally cracked slightly. "Mr. Hartwell, if I translate your proposal exactly as you've written it, without any cultural context, I can almost guarantee that the Japanese and Korean delegations will withdraw from the merger. The language you're using would be considered deeply insulting in their business culture." "Then maybe they're not the right partners for us," David replied coldly. "Maybe we need to find companies that appreciate direct American business practices instead of hiding behind elaborate courtesy rituals." Dr. Warner tried one more time to intervene. "David, this merger represents 18 months of relationship building and $200 million in projected revenue. If we lose these partnerships because of communication issues—" "We won't lose them because of communication issues," David snapped. "We'll lose them because our translator is more concerned with protecting foreign sensibilities than representing our company's interests." "Catherine, I'm giving you one more chance to do your job correctly. Translate my words exactly as I speak them, period. Catherine took a deep breath and made a decision that would change the trajectory of her career. Mr. Hartwell, I cannot in good conscience translate statements that I know will destroy these business relationships. My professional ethics require me to provide accurate and culturally appropriate translation services, not to facilitate international incidents. The conference room fell silent as David's face turned an alarming shade of red. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. Did you just tell me that you refuse to follow my direct orders? I'm telling you that what you're asking me to do violates the basic principles of professional translation and will damage your company's international reputation, Catherine replied, her voice steady despite the obvious personal risk. David stood slowly, his hands pressed flat against the conference table. Catherine, you're fired. Effective immediately, security will escort you to collect your personal items, and you'll be off the premises within 15 minutes. Dr. Warner, find me a translator who understands that their job is to work for Hartwell Global Dynamics, not for some international cultural sensitivity committee. Catherine nodded with dignity, gathered her materials, and walked toward the door. As she paused at the threshold, she turned back one last time. Mr. Hartwell, I hope you find what you're looking for. But I fear that what you're looking for will destroy everything you've built. After Catherine's departure, David spent the next 20 minutes venting his frustration to his remaining staff while frantically trying to locate a replacement translator for the crucial afternoon conference call. His assistant made urgent calls to translation services throughout Manhattan, but the short notice and specific language requirements were proving problematic. This is ridiculous, David fumed as another translation service informed them that their qualified multilingual interpreters were already booked. How hard can it be to find someone who speaks Japanese and knows how to follow simple instructions? It was during this frantic search that Manuel Rodriguez quietly entered the conference room, pushing his cleaning cart ahead of him. At 56, Manuel had worked as the night janitor for Hartwell Global Dynamics for nearly 8 years, arriving each evening after the executives went home to clean offices, empty trash cans, and maintain the pristine environment that David demanded. His gray uniform was always spotless, his manner always deferential, and his English, while functional, was heavily accented and limited to basic workplace communication. "Excuse me, sir," Manuel said in his typical broken English. "I am sorry to bother, but I need to clean the conference room for this afternoon meeting you have." David looked up from his phone with obvious irritation. "Manuel, whatever cleaning you need to do will have to wait. We're dealing with a crisis here." "Yes, sir, I understand," Manuel replied, but instead of leaving, he hesitated near the door. "Mr. Hartwell, I hear you need translator for Japanese meeting?" David stared at him in disbelief. "Manuel, I appreciate your concern, but we need a professional translator, not, this is a billion-dollar merger we're talking about." "I understand, sir," Manuel said quietly, "but maybe I can help. I speak Japanese little bit." The suggestion was so absurd that David actually laughed out loud. "Manuel, I'm sure you know a few words here and there, but we need someone who can handle complex business negotiations in multiple languages. This isn't ordering sushi at a restaurant." Dr. Warner, who had been watching this exchange with growing curiosity, leaned forward in her chair. "Manuel, what exactly do you mean when you say you speak Japanese?" Manuel shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny of the entire boardroom. How you say? I study languages for hobby. Japanese, Korean, some others." David was about to dismiss this ridiculous suggestion when his phone rang with yet another translation service informing him that they had no available interpreters for the afternoon. The clock was ticking toward the rescheduled conference call, and his options were rapidly disappearing. "This is insane," he muttered, then looked up at Manuel with desperate frustration. "Fine. Say something in Japanese. Prove that you know more than hello and thank you." Manuel looked around the room nervously, then began speaking in what was unmistakably fluent, sophisticated Japanese. The words flowed naturally from his lips as he delivered what sounded like a complex, formal business presentation, complete with the subtle, honorific language and respectful terminology that Catherine had been trying to explain earlier. The entire boardroom fell silent. David's mouth fell open as Manuel continued speaking for nearly 2 minutes in perfect Japanese, his pronunciation crisp and his grammar flawless. When he finished, the room remained stunned. What did you just say?" Dr. Warner asked in amazement. Manuel's demeanor had subtly shifted during his Japanese presentation, his posture becoming more confident and his expression more articulate. When he replied, his English was suddenly much clearer, though still accented. I was explaining the basic principles of respectful business partnership as understood in traditional Japanese corporate culture, he said. I mentioned the importance of mutual respect, long-term relationship building, and the concept of win-win negotiations that preserve dignity for all parties involved. David stared at his janitor as if seeing him for the first time. How the hell do you know how to speak Japanese like that? I told you, sir. I study languages for hobby, Manuel replied modestly. I have been learning Japanese for 15 years. Also Korean, German, Portuguese, Italian, French, and some Arabic. Dr. Warner was now leaning forward with intense interest. Manuel, are you telling us that you speak 7 languages? 8, if you count English, Manuel corrected gently, and Spanish is my first language, so 9 total. The boardroom erupted in whispered conversations as the executives tried to process this revelation. David sat back in his chair, his mind reeling as he tried to reconcile the image of his quiet, unassuming janitor with the multilingual scholar who had just delivered a flawless presentation in business-level Japanese. This is impossible, David said finally. You're a janitor, you've been cleaning our offices for 8 years. How could you possibly have learned 8 languages? Manuel's expression became slightly guarded, as if he was debating how much to reveal. Mr. Hartwell, I clean your offices at night. During the day, I have time to study. The library has many language learning resources, and the internet has conversation practice groups. Learning languages it brings me joy. But why? Dr. Warner asked. Why would you spend so much time learning languages if you're working as a janitor? Manuel was quiet for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. Because in my country, I was professor of linguistics at Universidad Nacional de Colombia. I spoke 6 languages fluently when I came to the United States 12 years ago. But here, my credentials were not recognized, my accent was considered too strong for academic positions, and I needed work immediately to support my family. The room fell completely silent as the implications of his words sank in. David felt a cold dread forming in his stomach as he began to understand the magnitude of what he was hearing. You're telling me, he said slowly, that you're actually a university professor who has been cleaning our offices because you couldn't find work in your field. Was a professor, Manuel corrected. Here I am janitor who studies languages in my free time. 2 different lives, Mr. Hartwell. You know me only as the man who empties your trash and cleans your windows. Dr. Warner pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. After a few moments, she looked up with an expression of amazement. Dr. Manuel Alejandro Rodriguez, former professor of applied linguistics at Universidad Nacional de Colombia. Published researcher in cross-cultural communication and multilingual business practices. Author of the definitive Spanish-language textbook on international business communication. She turned her phone screen toward the others, showing Manuel's academic profile and publication list. Manuel, you're Dr. Rodriguez. I've read your work on linguistic barriers in international commerce. It's considered groundbreaking in the field. Manuel nodded quietly. I am the same person, yes. Though here people know me only as the man who knows which cleaning products work best on your marble floors. David stared at the phone screen, seeing photograph after photograph of Manuel in academic settings, wearing professors' robes at graduation ceremonies, delivering presentations at international conferences, surrounded by colleagues and students who clearly held him in high regard. Why didn't you ever tell us? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you ever mention that you were qualified for positions in our company? Quote, Manuel's smile was sad but not bitter. Mr. Hartwell, in 8 years of working here, you have spoken to me perhaps 20 times, always to give instructions or express dissatisfaction with my work. You have never asked about my background, my education, my life outside these offices. I am invisible to you except when something needs cleaning or when I have failed to meet your standards. The truth of Manuel's words hit David like a physical blow. He tried to remember any conversation he had ever had with Manuel that went beyond work instructions, any moment when he had shown interest in Manuel as a human being rather than just another employee. He came up empty. But surely, Dr. Warner interjected, you could have applied for positions within our company that matched your qualifications. "With respect, Dr. Warner, what positions?" Manuel replied. "Your international consulting firm has never posted job openings for multilingual specialists or cross-cultural communication experts. And even if such positions existed, would you have seriously considered an application from a janitor with an accent, regardless of his credentials?" The uncomfortable silence that followed answered his question more clearly than words could have. David's phone buzzed with a reminder about the international conference call that was supposed to begin in 10 minutes. The call that would determine whether Hartwell Global Dynamics could salvage the merger that represented the largest deal in the company's history. "Manuel," David said desperately, "I know I have no right to ask this after everything, but we need help. This merger is crucial to our company's future, and I've just fired our only qualified translator. Could you possibly help us with this conference call?" Manuel studied David's face for a long moment, seeing the desperation and fear that had replaced his earlier arrogance. "Mr. Hartwell, are you asking me to help as Manuel the janitor who speaks some Japanese, or as Dr. Rodriguez, the professor of linguistics who specializes in international business communication?" The question hung in the air as David realized he was facing a choice that would define not just this business deal, but his entire approach to leadership and human dignity. "Dr. Rodriguez," David said finally, his voice humble for perhaps the first time in his adult life, "I'm asking for help from Dr. Rodriguez." Manuel nodded slowly. "Then I will help, but I will translate not just your words, but your intentions. I will facilitate communication that builds relationships rather than destroys them. And I will do it with the respect for cultural context that you dismissed when you fired Catherine." As Manuel left to prepare for the conference call, transforming in the eyes of everyone present from invisible janitor to respected expert, David sat alone in his office, staring at the wall where his own diplomas hung. For the first time in his life, he wondered what other brilliant minds he had overlooked, what other expertise he had dismissed, what other opportunities he had missed because he was too arrogant to see beyond job titles and accents. The janitor who spoke 7 languages fluently was about to save his company, but David realized that the man he had fired in rage had been right about one thing. What he was looking for might indeed destroy everything he had built, starting with his own assumptions about who deserved respect and recognition in his corporate empire. I should keep building toward the resolution while showing the contrast between David's failed approach and Manuel's success, and explore the themes of respect, dignity, and seeing people's true worth beyond their job titles. 15 minutes later, Manuel sat at the head of the conference table where Catherine had been dismissed in disgrace just hours earlier. He had exchanged his gray janitor's uniform for a simple but dignified dark suit that he kept in his office locker for special occasions. The transformation was remarkable. The invisible custodian had become a commanding presence who exuded quiet confidence and professional competence. David watched nervously from the side of the room as Manuel tested the video conference equipment with the technical fluency of someone who had clearly used such systems before. Dr. Warner and the other board members had arranged themselves around the table, their previous skepticism replaced by curiosity and growing respect. "Dr. Rodriguez," Dr. Warner said, still adjusting to using his proper title, "before we begin, could you give us a sense of your strategy for salvaging these negotiations?" Manuel adjusted his microphone and looked directly at David. "Mr. Hartwell, I have reviewed the contract proposals that caused this morning's problems. With your permission, I would like to suggest some modifications that maintain your business objectives while addressing the cultural concerns that led to the breakdown in communications." David nodded eagerly, his earlier resistance to cultural sensitivity completely abandoned in favor of desperate pragmatism. "Whatever you think will work." "The key," Manuel explained, "is understanding that effective international business communication is not about dominance or submission. It is about creating frameworks where all parties can succeed while maintaining their dignity. Your original proposals were substantively sound, but the language implied that Hartwell Global Dynamics viewed the international partners as subordinates rather than equals." As the video conference connected, Manuel's entire demeanor shifted into what was clearly a familiar professional mode. When the Japanese delegation appeared on the screen, he greeted them with flawless formal Japanese, his pronunciation so precise that even David could hear the difference between Manuel's speech and the awkward phrases he had heard from previous translators. The lead Japanese negotiator, Mr. Tanaka, responded with obvious surprise and pleasure at hearing such sophisticated Japanese from an American company representative. Manuel's conversation with him lasted several minutes, and David watched in amazement as both men smiled and nodded with genuine warmth. Mr. Tanaka expresses his appreciation that Hartwell Global Dynamics has engaged a translator who understands the subtle aspects of Japanese business communication, Manuel reported to the room. He says this demonstrates serious respect for the partnership. When the Korean delegation joined the call, Manuel seamlessly switched to fluent Korean, engaging in what appeared to be an equally sophisticated conversation with their representatives. The German and Brazilian teams received similar treatment in their native languages, and within 20 minutes, Manuel had re-established rapport with all 4 international groups. "Now," Manuel said to David, "if you would like to present your revised proposals, I will translate them in ways that preserve your business interests while respecting the cultural contexts of our partners." What followed was a masterclass in international diplomacy. Manuel took David's sometimes blunt American business language and transformed it into culturally appropriate communication that somehow managed to be both respectful and assertive. When David proposed contract terms that might have seemed aggressive, Manuel translated them as invitations to collaborate on mutually beneficial arrangements. The difference was immediate and dramatic. Where the morning's conference call had ended in confusion and offense, the afternoon session proceeded smoothly toward agreement. Each delegation began responding positively to proposals that were substantively identical to what Catherine had been asked to translate earlier, but presented through Manuel's expert cultural interpretation. "Mr. Hartwell," the German representative said through Manuel's translation, "your revised approach demonstrates the kind of international perspective we value in long-term partnerships. We are very interested in moving forward with these collaborations." The Japanese delegation was even more effusive in their praise, with Mr. Tanaka specifically complimenting Hartwell Global Dynamics on their sophisticated understanding of cross-cultural business practices. The Korean and Brazilian teams expressed similar enthusiasm for partnerships that clearly respected their perspectives while achieving American business objectives. By the end of the 2-hour conference call, preliminary agreements had been reached on all major points of the merger. The deals that had seemed lost forever that morning were not only restored, but strengthened by the relationships Manuel had built during the negotiations. As the international delegation signed off with promises to finalize contracts within the week, David sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The same business proposals that had nearly destroyed his company's international relationships had been transformed into the foundation for what would likely be the most successful merger in Hartwell Global Dynamics history. "Dr. Rodriguez," Dr. Warner said as soon as the conference ended, "that was absolutely remarkable. You didn't just translate language, you translated entire cultural frameworks." Manuel smiled modestly. "This is what professional linguistics training teaches, Dr. Warner. Language is never just words. It is context, relationship, history, and respect. When you understand these elements, you can facilitate genuine communication rather than mere information transfer." Quote. David finally found his voice. "Manuel, Dr. Rodriguez, I don't know how to thank you. You just saved our company." "No, Mr. Hartwell," Manuel replied gently. "I helped you recognize the value that was already present in your proposals. The business concepts were sound. They simply needed to be presented in ways that honored the dignity and expertise of your international partners." One of the junior executives who had witnessed the entire day's events raised her hand hesitantly. "Dr. Rodriguez, I have to ask, if you have this level of expertise, why have you been working as our janitor for 8 years? Manuel's expression grew thoughtful. "Because when I arrived in the United States, I needed immediate employment to support my family. Janitorial work was available, and it provided steady income while I attempted to navigate the complex process of credential recognition and academic employment." "But surely after a few years you could have transitioned to work that matched your qualifications?" "Perhaps," Manuel acknowledged. "But I discovered something unexpected in this work. Cleaning offices at night, being invisible to the people who worked here during the day, gave me a unique perspective on American business culture. I could observe how decisions were made, how communication succeeded or failed, how cultural assumptions shaped international relationships." He gestured around the conference room. "For 8 years, I have been conducting the most valuable research of my career while you believed I was just emptying trash cans." David stared at his former janitor, finally understanding that he had spent nearly a decade being observed and analyzed by one of the world's leading experts in international business communication. The man he had dismissed and ignored had been documenting every mistake, every missed opportunity, every moment of cultural blindness that had nearly destroyed his company. 6 months later, Dr. Manuel Rodriguez sat in the executive boardroom as Director of Global Communications, while David learned to check his assumptions and listen to voices he had never heard before. The fired translator had been vindicated. The merger had succeeded beyond all projections, and the janitor who spoke 7 languages fluently had taught them all that true expertise doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It simply waits, with infinite patience, for wisdom to finally recognize its worth. Sometimes the most profound education comes from the people we overlook, and the most expensive lessons are taught by those we never thought to ask.